Hey guys, welcome back to Ferrigno Freedom channel. I'm Dante Ferrigno and I have been doing a carnivore diet for a little over 3 years now, and it has literally changed everything in my life. The diet I'm doing is known as the lion diet, which means that I eat only animal meats, but specifically only meat from ruminant animals. Ruminant animals are the animals that have the multi-chambered stomachs, like cows, buffalo, bison, goats, sheep. There's a number of animals that are included in the ruminant family, basically your red meats. And, that's the thing that doctors used to always tell you, don't eat too much red meat. Well, now all I eat is red meat, and it's changed everything for the better. Isn't that amazing? It almost seems like they're telling us things that aren't true on purpose. Well, you be the judge on that one. What I would like to talk about today is something that I have mentioned to people and I've explained a little bit about in the past, but I haven't really done a full deep dive on it with you, and that's citric acid. Citric acid, when you see that in an ingredient on products, a lot of times when I find people are trying to transition to this way of eating, they're trying to cut down on some of the stuff they're having, and maybe they're having something they think is okay for them, but they look at the ingredients and they see something like citric acid and they think, oh, well, that's lemons, right? That's oranges. It must be healthy. It can't be that bad. And it's probably not the sugar part. So, hey, it's got to be okay, right? Well, this is the hard part. Citric acid is added to foods for flavor purposes. It's what gives it that savory, tangy, sweet, I don't know how to describe the flavor, but it's often in lemon lime products because it gives it that little bit of flavor that you're looking for that makes you want to come back for more. And that's about all the benefit that it really has, is to make you like it more. The problem is citric acid in products, when you see it listed on a label, that's not citric acid that came from a citrus fruit. They get that citric acid from a mold, a mushroom, a black mushroom, black mold that is called Aspergillus niger. And Aspergillus niger is well known to cause inflammatory problems in the human body. Inflammation is what causes us to have our joint pains and have our desire for comfort foods. So it's almost like eating something to get over your pains and difficulties and have that comfort for a moment, just for it to tell you you need more of the something that's causing you to feel some of that pain. So that's why I always warn against it. But today I want to take a look at citric acid a little bit closer for those of you who aren't aware of this particular ingredient. And there's a number of ingredients that you need to start to watch for, and I'll try to talk about some of those in the future. I want to take a look at this video called Industrial Production of Citric Acid, Dr. Deepika Malik. I don't know if I've seen this video in the past. I added it to my watch later videos, and it looks like I've watched a couple of minutes of it, but this is a subject that I covered over 2 years ago on this way of eating, but I thought we would do a deep dive on it today. So let's take a look at this now. Let me go ahead and cue it up here. All right, here we go. Let me go ahead and increase the screen size. And let's roll.
Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Deepika and today's topic of discussion is industrial production of citric acid. Citric acid was originally produced from lemons in 1784 by the Swedish chemist Carl Wilhelm Scheele. The discovery of its accumulation by Aspergillus niger in the early 1920s led to a rapid development of a fermentation process which 15 years later accounted for more than 95% of world's production of citric acid. Citric acid is usually occurring acid found primarily in several varieties of fruits and vegetables, with citrus fruits such as lemons and limes containing the highest amount of citric acid. The organic acid has many uses, including as a food additive or preservative, ingredient in cosmetic products, in pharmaceuticals, and as a powerful cleaving agent. It has pleasant taste and property of enhancing existing flavors have ensured dominance in industry. It is good natural preservative and is also used to add an acidic taste to food and soft drinks. Today, citric acid is produced in bulk amounts with an estimated worldwide production of 4 lakh tons per year, most of which is produced by fermentation with the fungus Aspergillus niger. Now let us see the definition of citric acid. Citric acid, also known as 2-hydroxy 1,2,3-propane tricarboxylic acid with the molecular formula of C6H8O7 is a weak organic tricarboxylic acid found in citrus fruits. Citrus fruits like lemons, oranges, tomatoes, beets, etc. are those fruits which contain sufficient amount citric acid, and they are classified as acid fruits. Citric acid is excreted from the cells in response to unfavorable intracellular conditions caused by increased levels of tricarboxylic acids. It is a natural intermediate in Krebs cycle. A crucial prerequisite for overflow of citric acid from Aspergillus niger cells is therefore increased level of Krebs cycle intermediates caused by anaplerotic reactions. Anaplerotic reactions are chemical reactions that form intermediates of a metabolic pathway. Citric acid is naturally non-toxic due to its widespread presence. Now let us see the mechanism of formation of citric acid. Citric acid is principal organic acid produced in citric acid cycle. The biochemical pathway in formation of citric acid is shown in the image. When mycelium grows actively, citric acid is produced as an intermediate in citric acid cycle and is further diverted to growth promoting biosynthesis or release energy. Now let us see some uses of citric acid. Citric acid are used as preservative and flavoring agents in food and beverages such as soft drinks. They are used as an emulsifying agent in ice creams. They are an excellent chelating agent. Citric acid is used as an acidulant in gels, creams and liquids of all kinds. Acidulants are chemical compounds that confer a sour or acidic flavor to foods. Next slide shows the different sources of carbon that can be used in the production of citric acid. Sucrose, according to laboratory studies, is the best source of carbon among various tested organic substances, particularly sugars, in producing high yields of citric acid. It was also reported that sucrose concentration exceeding 15% should not be used, since the excess amount of sugar remained unconverted to citric acid. When a part of sucrose was substituted by fructose or glucose, it resulted in lower yields of citric acid than when controls containing sucrose alone were used. As we know, sucrose is a disaccharide composed of two monosaccharides, glucose and fructose. Therefore, precaution is to be taken while using sucrose to avoid partial hydrolysis. Under laboratory conditions, the highest yields of citric acid are secured provided sucrose has been passed through an ion exchange resin. This is done for demineralization, that is loss of minerals of the sugar juice. So it is important to get rid of these metal ions which can otherwise hinder the process of citric acid production. Substrates of high purity such as hydrolyzed starch, pure glucose, refined or raw sugar, purified and condensed beet or cane juice have high yields in submerged culture. Beet molasses is extensively used as a carbon substrate in the fungal production of citric acid on a commercial basis. Beet molasses require pretreatment since it contains excessive amount of trace metals. Therefore, ferrocyanide or ferricyanide may be added to the production medium before sterilization. The metals of the beet molasses form a complex with the added chemical agent, thus eliminating themselves as the precipitate. So in case of beet molasses also, there is a need to remove these trace elements which can otherwise hinder the process of citric acid production. Now let us see the influence of trace metals. The type and quantity of metallic ions
You know, it seems like she's talking about this like, yeah, this is all perfectly fine and normal for something that you're going to consume so that your food will taste a little better, or maybe it preserves it a little bit longer. This sounds like a science experiment gone awry already to me, just listening to what she's talking about. Now she's talking about trace metals being added to the process and sugars involved in the process and beet molasses, and there's all kind of things in there I don't want in my food. I don't think of any of that stuff when I think of citric acid, but she's talking about it like it's all totally normal. Now, I know she's given the microbiology standpoint on this, and she's recognizing that it's generally recognized as safe. As those of you who are familiar with the FDA, they rubber stamp that on just about everything that comes down the line. As long as those companies are paying their bills, they'll say, oh yeah, that's close enough to the other product you had, until finally a few generations down the line of getting products approved this way, you have something that doesn't recognize what was originally approved by testing at all. Even if they're doing any testing anymore, who knows? I mean, it seems like our corruption has just run rampant in the system these days. But in just what you've heard so far, does this sound like something that you would want to have in your food just so that it'll have a little bit of a taste that gets you to want to come back and have more of it because it tricks you into thinking that it's like a lemon or a lime product or that it's like a citrus product instead of just, why not just have a citrus product if that's what you want? Why get something that has to go through all of this to be made into something that makes your product taste like food? That's what I don't understand. I'd just as soon not have either, but I digress.
Iron and zinc required for citric acid production from Aspergillus niger fermentation largely depend on the type of fungal strain to be used in the process. Iron ions in higher concentration than 1.5 mg per liter strongly affect cellular morphology by promoting unproductive filamentous mycelial growth form and giving no increase in citric acid yield. This means that at a higher concentration, iron is only promoting the growth of the fungus but not of the product. 1 microgram per liter of manganese could completely ruin the production yield and cause organisms' morphology to switch from microbial pellets, as you can see in the first image, which are also known as citric acid productive form, to unproductive filamentous growth as shown in the second image. So by this we can conclude that the morphology of fungus within the fermenter play a very important role in the production of citric acid. Fungal pellets are more efficient in producing the desired product rather than mycelial mat floating on the surface. The fermentation medium is first freed of trace elements, example manganese, zinc, iron or phosphates through ion exchange resins because the trace elements exert inhibition of citric acid formation above a critical level. Therefore, the presence of these trace elements beyond a certain limit is not suitable for the production of citric acid. Next important components are inorganic salts. Apart from the carbon, hydrogen and oxygen supplied by the added carbohydrate, the inorganic elements namely nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, sulfur and magnesium are needed in the fermentation medium for citric acid production. It is highly essential to add ammonium nitrate, potassium dihydrogen phosphate, dipotassium phosphate or magnesium sulfate heptahydrate only in a minimum quantity, since the presence of these metallic salts beyond their limits affects the fermentation adversely. Low pH values have found to be the most favorable for citric acid production. The pH of the medium is initially adjusted to 3.4 to 3.5 with HCl. On spore germination, pH drops down to the range of 1.5 to 2. The use of HCl has been found superior to nitric, sulfuric and acetic acids in producing higher yields of citric acid. Generally, calcium carbonate is not added to the production medium to bring about the neutralization of citric acid produced because its presence favors contamination. Moreover, its absence favors high yields of citric acid and a shorter fermentation time. Low pH values in Aspergillus niger citric acid fermentation are desirable for the following reasons. First is sterilization of medium is more readily affected. Second, formation of citric acid is favored at low pH. Third, formation of oxalic acid is suppressed at low pH. Fourth, the danger of contamination is minimized at low pH. Next, the exact required temperature of incubation depends in part on the fungal strain and the fermentation conditions. However, a temperature range of 26 to 28 degrees Celsius for 7 to 10 days is considered to be satisfactory. Now let us have a look at different microorganisms used for citric acid production. Large number of microorganisms including bacteria, fungi and yeasts have been employed to produce citric acid. The main advantages of using these microorganisms are its ease of handling, its ability to ferment a variety of cheap raw materials and high yields. The table shows the important species of fungi, bacteria and yeast involved in the production of citric acid, and the most important among these being the Aspergillus niger. It is very important to choose a suitable fungal strain for producing citric acid successfully. Many fungi have been reported to possess the ability to produce citric acid. For example, Aspergillus niger, Aspergillus clavatus, Penicillium luteum, Penicillium citrinum, Paecilomyces divaricatum, Mucor piriformis, Ustulina vulgaris, and other species of mucor have been employed to produce it.
I'm getting a kick at some of these closed captioning captions here because the words don't match what she's saying at all. But anyway, I also realized that I have not seen this video before, and I'm surprised because it goes into a lot more detail than other things that I've looked at. But it's just amazing to me that she's explaining this in such a way as if to say, yeah, this is all normal. This is a normal way to come about this one ingredient that's usually one of 50 ingredients in a product that you might be eating. I was watching a movie yesterday that I used to love back in the 80s called Remo Williams, The Adventure Begins. Unfortunately, it was the only movie in the series. It never had a follow-up. But it showed this guy who was on a very strict diet, he was training Remo to be a weapon, an assassin. It's a whole different, it's an action movie. It's something a little bit different than has anything to do with this way of eating. But he was looking at the food Remo was eating, and he grabbed the can and was reading the ingredients, and he said, it would be better for you to eat this can than what is inside of it. And that's exactly what I think when I hear stuff like this. Just one ingredient, all of this crazy nonsense has to go through to get into the food that you're going to eat. And that's just one. When you read all these other long, hard words to say that are on the ingredient list on your bread, for God's sake. I mean, how can bread have more ingredients than wheat, salt, and water? I mean, those are the only things you really need to make bread. But yet, when you read a label for a bag of bread, there's 50 different ingredients on there. And none of those things are good for your body. It just blows my mind. Somehow listening to somebody explain it like this and all the education that we've had in science class and in school has got us to where we just accept that this is normal. But this isn't normal. This isn't normal for us to eat things like this. And our bodies don't know what to do with it. And that's why we're sick and fat and diseased today.
Acid in the laboratory or on a commercial basis. But only Aspergillus niger strains among these fungal strains are used for the following reasons. They are efficient, that is high-yielding strains. They possess fairly uniform biochemical properties. They produce a negligible or small amount of oxalic acid, provided fermentation conditions, that is pH and salts, have been adjusted to favor the formation of citric acid. They can be easily cultivated.
So basically they're easier and cheaper, and that's why we use that to get the citric acid for your food to make it taste a little bit better. It's all about quick, easy, cheap, addictive.
Now let us see the types of production processes involved in the production of citric acid. Fermentation is the most economical and widely used method for synthesis of citric acid. The industrial citric acid production can be carried in three different ways. First is surface fermentation. In this case, Aspergillus niger floats on the surface of liquid medium. Second is submerged fermentation. It is the process in which the fungal mycelium grows as fungal pellets throughout the liquid medium in a fermenter. Third is solid state fermentation. It is a Japanese process in which special strains of Aspergillus niger are used with a solid substrate such as sweet potato starch. Surface or submerged fermentation techniques dominate over solid state fermentation in preparing citric acid by extraction from various juices. Promising results were obtained in fed batch process and by continuous fermentation. Citric acid fermentation using immobilized Aspergillus niger cells on various kinds of carriers such as glass, polyurethane forms, entrapment in calcium alginate beads, polyacrylamide gels, agar, agarose, cellulose carriers, metal screens, and polyester felts have given promising results. These are the methods of immobilization of the spores of Aspergillus niger, giving sufficient production of citric acid during fermentations. Now let us discuss all these fermentation processes one by one in detail. First is surface fermentation. The fermentation is usually carried out in aluminium trays filled with liquid nutrient medium to a depth of between 50 to 200 cm. Molasses solution containing inorganic nitrogenous salts is used as fermentation medium. The pH is maintained at about 2. Spores of Aspergillus niger are now distributed over the surface of the trays, and sterile air serving both as an oxygen supply as well as a cooling aid is passed over them. The mycelium develops on the surface. The fermentation is completed within a period of 7 to 12 days at 30 degrees Celsius. The culture fluid is taken out from the bottom of the trays, leaving the mycelial mat of Aspergillus niger more or less undisturbed. Citric acid is recovered from the fluid by precipitation. Fresh medium is added into the trays for the next batch of fermentation. The diagram gives an idea of the surface fermentation. Raw materials are stored in storage tank from where they are prepared for fermentation. Preparation involves mixing and heating with water. The complex substrates undergo starch hydrolysis to release fermentable sugars. After preparation, the substrates are now distributed over the surface of the trays, which are then inoculated with the spores of Aspergillus niger. The main advantages of surface fermentation are the low power requirements of the process, the high reproducibility of the process due to its lower susceptibility to interference by trace metal ions, and variations in the dissolved oxygen tension, since it is a stationary process. The disadvantage is that it is an older and more labor-intensive version of fermentation for citric acid production. Second type.
So the disadvantage is that it's more labor intensive, not that it's older. Something old can obviously that can't be a con just because it's something that's old, unless something newer is actually better. But what they're saying is it's more labor intensive to do it this way. They wanted to find a cheaper way to do it. Let's see what the cheaper way is.
Process is the submerged fermentation process. Now this process can be carried out using either fungi, that is Aspergillus niger, or yeast. In the first type, the fungus is grown to disperse through a liquid production medium. Fermentation is carried out in fermenters equipped with a mechanical agitator for mixing and a sparger for aeration. For inoculum preparation, the mold, that is Aspergillus niger spores, are produced under controlled aseptic conditions. They are used in specific quantities to seed the inoculum tank containing inoculum medium, designed to develop small pellets, that is aggregates of fungal hyphae, as you can see in the image, of size 0.2 to 0.5 mm, having a firm and smooth surface. This striking morphology has been shown to be critical for attaining high yields by submerged fermentation. So for submerged fermentation, fungi pellets are developed first in inoculum medium before adding it into fermenter. As we have discussed earlier also, pellets are more efficient in giving high yields of citric acid, which is produced extracellularly rather than mycelial mats. After the inoculum has been prepared, it is then transferred to the production tank under aseptic conditions. In contrast to the composition of the inoculum medium, production medium contains constituents so as to favor citric acid production rather than growth. So inoculum medium and production medium are two different mediums. Inoculum medium favors the growth of fungi, whereas production medium favors the production of citric acid in a high concentration. High aeration rates producing much foam are necessary, and it is allowed to grow for about 5 to 14 days at 27 to 33 degrees Celsius. Samples are regularly withdrawn to determine the citric acid and sugar content, revealing the progress of the fermentation process. In addition to this, pH, dissolved oxygen and solids contents are also determined. Now, submerged fermentation can also be carried out using yeast. The belief that industrial production of citric acid could be possible only by Aspergillus niger was disapproved in about 1970. Citric acid production by yeast is exclusively carried out by submerged cultivation. The submerged fermentation process is desirable because of its higher efficacy due to higher susceptibility to automatization. Citric acid is produced using yeast Candida guillermondi, grown submerged in a medium containing either glucose or blackstrap molasses with an equivalent amount of sugar. Using certain strains of Candida lipolytica, hydrocarbons and alkanes have been used as raw materials in citric acid production. The main advantages of using yeasts are that yeasts are characterized by greater resistance to high substrate concentrations than fungi, with comparable conversion rates, and have greater tolerance to metal ions that allows the use of less refined
Oh, That's on her screen. Her battery's about to die. That's hilarious.
Using yeasts also give a better process control due to their unicellular nature. With yeast fermentation, the duration of the fermentation period was much shorter than that of the submerged culture process involving Aspergillus niger. The next type of process are the solid state fermentation.
Okay, so I didn't know anything about the yeast option, but that's definitely not something I want in my diet either. I don't want to have anything to do with yeast fermentation in my foods. Let's go on to see what else she has to say about this fermentation process. I know this can be a little boring for some of you, but just think about how much is going into making one ingredient on your processed food list.
For production of citric acid. It is the simplest method for its production. The solid substrate like bran is soaked with water and steamed so as to get the water content of the mash around 65 to 70%. A bran mash is simply wheat or rice bran mixed with boiling water until it reaches the desired consistency and is allowed to steep for 15 minutes. Steeping is again a process of increasing the moisture content of the substrate. After cooling the substrate to 30 to 60 degrees Celsius, Aspergillus niger is inoculated. The pH of the substrate is about 5 to 5.5 and is spread in trays to a depth of 3 to 5 cm after inoculation. Growth can be accelerated by adding alpha amylase, although the fungus can hydrolyze starch with its own alpha amylase. This conversion of starch into fermentable sugar is also termed as saccharification. During the citric acid production, pH drops down to the value below 2. The solid state surface process takes 5 to 8 days, at the end of which the entire citric acid is extracted with hot water. Citric acid production reached to a maximum yield of 88 grams per kg dry matter when fermentation was carried out with cassava, having initial moisture of 62% at 26 degrees Celsius for 120 hours. Cassava is a root vegetable, as you can see in the image. Now, after fermentation is complete, first step is the separation of biomass, that is mycelia or cells, from fermentation broth by filtration. The liquid broth obtained, known as mother liquor, is now transferred to recovery process. Now, recovery can also be done by two methods. First is the precipitation technique. The filtered broth is treated with calcium hydroxide so that the relatively insoluble calcium citrate crystals will be precipitated from solution. The calcium citrate is filtered off, washed with water and treated with sulfuric acid to precipitate the calcium as the insoluble calcium sulfate and release the citric acid. This citric acid is subjected to the treatment with activated carbon. It is demineralized by successive passage through ion exchange beds, and then the purified solution is evaporated to the point of crystallization in a circulating granulator or in a circulating crystallizers. The crystals are removed by centrifugation. The remaining mother liquor, that is the liquid remaining after substance has crystallized out, is returned to the recovery stream. This is the only commercially viable process existing, but the common precipitation process for isolation of citric acid produces 2.5 tons of waste per ton of citric acid. It is therefore reasonable to look for other methods of citric acid recovery. Another method for recovery of citric acid is by solvent extraction. Solvent extraction is a possible alternative to the classical method. However, the solvents tend to extract some of the impurities contained in molasses-derived liquors. The advantage of the solvent extraction method is to avoid the use of lime and sulfuric acid and the containment problem of gypsum disposal. The solvent extraction can be performed by adding 100 parts tri-N-butyl phosphate and 5 or 30 parts N-butyl acetate or methyl isobutyl ketone, which are to be mixed with the filtrate. The solvent is then extracted with water at 70 to 90 degrees Celsius. Citric acid is further concentrated, decolorized or bleached and crystallized. After we have recovered the crystals of citric acid, they are finally dried and packaged. Now let us have a quick review on the process of citric acid production. First step is the selection and preparation of raw material by passing it through ion exchangers to remove trace elements which can interfere with the entire process of citric acid making. The substrate is now inoculated with this suitable microorganism to carry out fermentation. Fermentation can be done by any of the three processes. In surface fermentation, the spores of Aspergillus niger floats on the surface of liquid medium. In submerged fermentation, the fungal mycelium grows as fungal pellets throughout the liquid medium in a fermenter. This submerged fermentation is also suitable when using yeast for the production of citric acid. For solid state fermentation, solid substrate are used and inoculated with the Aspergillus niger. After fermentation is complete, the next step is separation of biomass, that is fungal mycelia or yeast cells, from the fermentation broth. Now the next steps are for the recovery of citric acid by precipitation techniques. The filtered broth is first treated with calcium hydroxide to remove insoluble calcium citrate crystals. These calcium citrate crystals are then washed with water and treated with sulfuric acid to release the citric acid. The citric acid is now treated with activated carbon. After that, it is demineralized by passing through the ion exchange beds. Further, they are purified by evaporation and crystallization to obtain citric acid crystals. These crystals are then removed by centrifugation. Now, after the crystals are obtained, citric acid is dried and packaged. With this, we wind up the topic of industrial production of citric acid. For any doubts or queries, you can contact me through the given email ID. Thank you.
Well, there you go. Everything you ever wanted to know about manufactured citric acid as far as the way it's manufactured, it's probably more than you wanted to know, to be honest with you. But I wanted to watch this video because I was hoping she was going to drive the point home. And even though it was tough getting through this video, I think it was worth the time for you to realize how much processing goes through just one ingredient on that list of ingredients in the food that you're eating. If you're not eating something like a carnivore way of eating that eliminates all this processed garbage that's in our food. When you go to the store, if you're not on a full carnivore way of eating, or you're not doing something that reduces these things, and you're reading the labels on these products, be sure not to only look at the part of the label where it tells you the percentage of the daily value of calcium and all that stuff. Just read the ingredients. Get to know the ingredients. Get to know what those ingredients are, how those ingredients came to be. Don't just assume that there's something natural. Even natural flavoring can be as unnatural as anything that's out there. It's mind-boggling what these ingredients have in them and what they do to your body in the long run. And she didn't talk about any of what it does to your body, except that it's basically recognized as safe. But when you take something that's basically recognized as safe and have it in such quantities that it's in everything you eat, and then you have a number of other ingredients that are just like that same product, generally recognized as safe, but not in large amounts, but you're getting it in larger amounts, and then you're adding to that all the other ingredients that are in those products, it's no wonder that I wound up with leaky gut or permeated gut problems that have caused me to have all kind of other problems in my system, from inflammation, from a high blood pressure, from being overweight, having depression and anxiety problems, so many issues that are led to in our lives by eating this poison and this junk and just accepting that this is what we should be eating and that it's okay. All I can tell you is say no. Say, no, I'm not going to have any more of this stuff. I'm going to start eating naturally. I'm going to start eating an ancestrally appropriate diet. If it was on the menu 1,000 years ago, then it probably should be on the menu today. But if you look at what people ate 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, and what you're eating isn't something that they would have been able to eat, you probably shouldn't be eating it. Our bodies are amazing things, and it can take a lot of damage. But we are really pounding in the materials and the products that damage us at rates today that are unheard of. And then we wonder why, even with all the healthcare push and everybody's quit smoking and we've started to cut back on this and that and the other, and everybody's trying to be healthy, but yet we still have more and more people with dementia and Alzheimer's and diabetes and overweight than we ever had before. It's the food, people. It's the stuff we're eating. And it's the stuff that you're feeding your children. Please take a close look at these things. Start paying attention to what you put into this one machine you've been given to play the game of life with until the day you're not here anymore. That's all I got to say for this one, guys. I hope this encourages you to take a closer look at what you're putting in your body, because even something as innocuous looking as citric acid can be all of this. I'll see you guys next time.
If we pay extra, could we maybe get some grease or fat?
One of the things I do to fight back against big food and big pharma is to recommend companies that make animal-based products that are good for our bodies and good for our skin. In this case, I'm talking about Vintage Tradition. Vintage Tradition tallow balms are a go-to for me now, especially the unscented one. I like it because it doesn't have anything extra in it other than extra virgin olive oil and tallow rendered from suet. This is the interior fat, also called suet or kidney fat. For the tallow they use making the tallow balm. Highly saturated and therefore more therapeutic than any other. They don't use any trim fat or any other fats besides suet. So if you want some ancestrally appropriate skincare products that are going to help support the carnivore movement, head over to vintagetradition.com and use my discount code DANTE, D-A-N-T-E, to save 10% on your order. I promise you won't regret it. Their products are fantastic. I love them and I use them all the time.